You need to be reasonable about this, Danielle. We're talking about our future here. Travis stood in our kitchen in Phoenix, his voice carrying that familiar edge that always made my stomach tighten. The morning sun streaming through the window caught the anger in his eyes as he held up the inheritance documents my grandmother had left me 6 months ago. My future, I corrected him, reaching for my coffee mug. This is my inheritance, Travis. My grandmother left it to me. My name is Danielle Frost. I'm 33 years old. And for the past 4 years, I've been married to a man who seemed to view every dollar I earned or inherited as his personal property. What started as small requests for help with his credit card bills had escalated into something much darker. Travis worked as a sales manager at North Peak Engineering, but his spending habits always outpaced his income. My job as a pediatric nurse at Phoenix Children's Hospital provided steady income, but it was never enough for him. The inheritance from my grandmother's estate was substantial, $200,000 plus her property in Tucson. She had been a successful real estate investor who'd spent decades building her wealth. More importantly, she'd been the one person in my family who truly understood me. In her will, she'd made it crystal clear that the money was for me alone, not for any husband or future spouse. Don't be selfish, Travis snapped, slamming the papers down on the granite countertop. We could pay off my student loans, fix up this house, maybe even start a business. You're thinking like a single woman instead of a wife. I felt the familiar chill that ran down my spine whenever he used that tone. Travis, we've discussed this. The money is mine to decide what to do with. Discussed it? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. You mean you've made up your mind and refuse to listen to reason? That's not how marriage works, Danielle. The way he said my name, like it tasted bitter in his mouth, told me this conversation was about to get worse. I'd been hoping we could find a compromise, maybe use some of the money for home improvements while keeping the bulk of it in my personal account. But the look in Travis's eyes told me he wanted it all. I've been patient with you, he continued, moving closer. But this stubbornness has to stop. We're going to sit down with my family this weekend and figure out the best way to handle this money. No more games. Something in his voice made me pause. This wasn't just another argument about money. There was a planning quality to his words that hadn't been there before, like he'd already decided how this was going to end. Looking back, I should have seen the warning signs much earlier. Travis had always been controlling about finances, but it had started so gradually that I'd convinced myself it was normal relationship stuff. When we'd first gotten married, he'd suggested we open a joint account to make things easier. Within 6 months, he was questioning every purchase I made and insisting that all major financial decisions go through him first. The manipulation had been subtle at first. He'd make comments about how traditional wives handled money, or how his mother had always deferred to his father on financial matters. When I'd pushed back, he'd accuse me of not trusting him or not being committed to our marriage. Gradually, I'd found myself asking his permission for things that should have been my choice alone. My relationship with Travis's family had always been complicated. His mother, Beverly, had never warmed to me, and his brother Kevin seemed to view me as an outsider who'd never quite measure up to their family's standards. They lived in a sprawling house in Scottsdale and made sure everyone knew about their financial success. Kevin owned a chain of auto repair shops, and Beverly frequently reminded me that successful families stick together when it came to money. During family gatherings, I'd noticed how they discussed finances openly, debating investments and business opportunities like they were planning military campaigns. More than once, I'd caught them looking at me with calculation in their eyes, as if they were trying to figure out what I might be worth to them. The inheritance had changed everything. Within days of my grandmother's will being read, Travis's entire demeanor had shifted. He'd become more insistent, more demanding, and far less willing to take no for an answer. He'd started making comments about how family money should benefit the whole family, and how my grandmother would have wanted us to be smart about the windfall. "You don't understand business like we do," he'd said just last week. "Kevin and I have been talking, and we think there are some really good investment opportunities right now. Your grandmother's money could be the seed capital we need." The fact that he'd been discussing my inheritance with his brother without my knowledge had been the first real alarm bell. I'd confronted him about it, and he'd brushed off my concerns with his usual dismissive attitude. "We're family," he'd said. "Of course I'm going to talk to Kevin about important financial decisions. That's what successful people do. They get advice from other successful people." But I'd seen something different in his eyes during that conversation. Something calculating and cold that made me wonder if the man I'd married had ever really loved me, or if he'd just been waiting for an opportunity like this. Now, standing in our kitchen with the morning light making his expression look harsh and unfamiliar, I realized that whatever happened this weekend, our marriage would never be the same. The turning point came 3 days later when I discovered the folders hidden in Travis's home office. I'd gone in looking for our tax documents, something completely innocent, when I'd accidentally knocked over a stack of papers from his desk. As I bent to pick them up, I saw my name on several documents I'd never seen before. My hands were shaking as I read through what appeared to be preliminary paperwork for transferring assets. There were forms with my signature forged, bank account information I'd never provided, and most chilling of all, a document that looked suspiciously like a power of attorney that would give Travis complete control over my inheritance. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Not only had he been planning to take my grandmother's money, but he'd been actively working to steal it from me. The dates on the documents showed he'd been planning this for weeks, possibly since the day the will had been read. I photographed everything with my phone, my heart racing as I heard his car pull into the driveway. By the time he walked through the front door, I'd managed to replace the papers exactly as I'd found them, but the damage to my trust was irreversible. "How was work?" he asked, kissing my cheek like nothing had changed. "Fine," I managed, trying to keep my voice steady. "Travis, about this weekend meeting with your family, what about it?" He was already moving toward the refrigerator, grabbing a beer with the casual confidence of a man who thought he had everything under control. "I just want to make sure I understand what we're discussing. You said we need to figure out the best way to handle the inheritance money." He turned to face me, and I saw something flicker in his expression. Satisfaction, maybe. Or anticipation. "Exactly. Kevin's been looking into some investment opportunities, and my parents have some ideas about property development. We just want to make sure you're making smart choices." The way he said "smart choices" made my skin crawl. It was the same tone he used when he was explaining why I was wrong about something. Patient, but condescending. "And if I don't agree with these smart choices?" His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Come on, Danielle. You're not a financial expert. None of us want to see you make mistakes with this kind of money. Your grandmother worked hard for it. Don't you want to honor her legacy by being responsible?" The manipulation was so smooth, so practiced, that I almost doubted what I'd seen in his office. But the documents were real, and the cold calculation in his voice was real too. "Of course," I said, forcing myself to smile back. "I want to do the right thing." But as I watched him nod approvingly, I knew that whatever happened this weekend, I was walking into a trap. The question was whether I'd be ready for it. The weekend arrived with the kind of oppressive Arizona heat that made everything feel heavy and threatening. Travis had insisted on driving separately to his brother's house in Scottsdale, claiming he had errands to run first. As I pulled into Kevin's circular driveway, I noticed several unfamiliar cars parked alongside the usual family vehicles. Kevin's house was one of those sprawling Mediterranean-style homes that screamed success, complete with palm trees and a fountain that probably cost more than most people's cars. Beverly answered the door, wearing the kind of smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Danielle, dear, so glad you could make it. We're all so excited to help you with this inheritance situation." The way she said "help" made my stomach clench. I followed her through the marble foyer into Kevin's study, where I stopped short. This wasn't the casual family discussion Travis had described. 3 men in expensive suits sat around Kevin's mahogany conference table, briefcases open, legal documents spread across the surface. "Surprise," Travis said from behind me, his hand settling possessively on my lower back. "I thought it would be smart to have professional advice for such an important decision." Kevin stood up, his smile as cold as his mother's. "Danielle, meet Harold Vance, Thomas Reed, and Bradley Cooper, all very accomplished attorneys who specialize in estate planning and asset management." The oldest of the 3, Harold, extended his hand. "Mrs. Travis, we've heard wonderful things about your inheritance. Your husband and his family have asked us to help structure things in the most advantageous way possible." "Mrs. Travis." Not Mrs. Frost, not even Danielle. I was already being reduced to an extension of my husband. "I wasn't aware we needed 3 attorneys for a family discussion," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Thomas, a thin man with calculating eyes, gestured toward the empty chair they'd obviously reserved for me. "These matters can be quite complex. We want to make sure all the legal bases are covered." As I sat down, I noticed the documents were already prepared. My name was typed at the bottom of multiple pages, with signature lines highlighted in yellow. They weren't here to advise me. They were here to process paperwork they'd already prepared. "Now then," Bradley said, sliding a thick folder across the table. "We've taken the liberty of reviewing your situation and preparing some recommendations. The most efficient approach would be to establish a family trust with your husband as the primary trustee. That way," Harold added, "the money can be managed professionally while still providing security for your future." I picked up the first document, scanning the dense legal language. Even with my limited legal knowledge, I could see what they were really proposing. Travis would have complete control over every penny, with the authority to make any investment or expenditure decisions he deemed appropriate. "This gives Travis power of attorney over the entire inheritance," I said. "It provides professional management," Thomas corrected smoothly. "Your husband has demonstrated excellent financial judgment, and his family has extensive business experience." Beverly leaned forward from her position behind Travis's chair. "Darling, we're just trying to protect you from making emotional decisions about such a large sum. Women can be so impulsive with money." The casual sexism hit me like a slap. "Impulsive?" "You have to understand," Kevin said, his voice taking on the same patronizing tone Travis used. "This kind of money requires sophisticated management. You're a nurse, a noble profession, of course, but you don't have the background to handle complex investments." Travis reached over and placed his hand on mine, squeezing just hard enough to be uncomfortable. "Babe, we've talked about this. You know I only want what's best for us." But his eyes were sending a different message entirely. "Sign it," they said. "Don't make this difficult." I looked around the table at the 5 men and 1 woman who had orchestrated this ambush, all of them watching me with the patience of predators who knew their prey was trapped. "I need to think about this," I said. "Of course," Harold replied, his smile never wavering. "But perhaps we could walk through the basic structure first, just so you understand what we're proposing." For the next hour, they tag-teamed me with explanations and justifications, each more condescending than the last. The trust structure they'd designed was elaborate and impressive sounding, but every clause funneled control away from me and toward Travis. They had answers for every concern I raised, responses that sounded reasonable but felt wrong. "What if Travis and I divorce?" I asked at one point. The question hung in the air like a bomb. Beverly's face went white, Kevin's jaw tightened, and Travis's hand on my arm became painful. "Why would you even think about that?" Travis asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Harold cleared his throat diplomatically. "The trust structure actually provides protection in such unlikely scenarios. The assets would remain within the family unit that your grandmother intended to benefit." "Family unit meaning Travis's family," I clarified. Meaning the family you joined when you married, Thomas corrected. Your grandmother's legacy would be preserved according to the original intent. It was masterfully manipulative. They were reframing my grandmother's bequest to me as somehow intended for Travis's family, even though she'd never met any of them, and had specifically structured her will to leave everything to me personally. I'd like to see the original language from my grandmother's will, I said. Bradley was already reaching into his briefcase. We have it right here, along with our legal interpretation of the testator's intent. But as he slid the documents across the table, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. These weren't copies of my grandmother's actual will. They were excerpts, carefully selected passages that had been taken out of context to support their narrative. This isn't the complete will, I said. We've highlighted the relevant sections, Kevin said quickly. The legal language can be confusing for laypeople. I want to see the entire document. Danielle, Travis's voice carried a warning. Don't be difficult. These people are trying to help us. But I was beginning to understand that this wasn't about helping anyone except Travis and his family. The elaborate legal presentation, the multiple attorneys, the carefully prepared documents. This was a coordinated effort to separate me from my inheritance through intimidation and manipulation. You know what? I said, standing up so suddenly that my chair rolled backward. I think I need to consult with my own attorney before making any decisions. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Harold exchanged glances with Thomas, who looked at Bradley. Kevin's face flushed red, and Beverly made a small, shocked sound. Your own attorney? Travis stood up too, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Why would you need your own attorney? We're all on the same side here. Are we? I asked, meeting his eyes directly. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like 5 people trying to pressure one person into signing away their inheritance. That's ridiculous, Kevin said, but his voice lacked conviction. Harold tried to regain control of the situation. Mrs. Travis, I understand this is overwhelming. Perhaps we could schedule another meeting next week. Give you time to review everything more carefully. Actually, I said, reaching for my purse. I think I'm done reviewing for today. Travis grabbed my arm as I turned toward the door. You're not leaving. We're going to settle this right now. The mask was finally slipping. The patient, reasonable husband was being replaced by someone harder and more desperate. Let go of me, I said quietly. Danielle, be smart about this, he said, his grip tightening. You're embarrassing yourself, and you're embarrassing me. Just sign the papers. For a moment, the room was completely silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning and the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. Actually, I said, pulling out my phone and checking the time. I should mention that I brought someone too. The confusion on their faces was almost comical. Travis's grip on my arm loosened slightly. What are you talking about? Kevin demanded. Well, when you told me this was going to be a family discussion, Travis, I thought it might be nice to have some professional advice of my own. You know, just to make sure I understood everything properly. I could see the panic starting to set in around the table. Harold leaned forward, his professional composure beginning to crack. You didn't mention bringing legal representation, he said carefully. Funny thing, I continued, walking toward the study's large windows that overlooked the front driveway. Neither did you. A black SUV was pulling through the gates, followed by a smaller sedan. Both vehicles parked behind my car, and I watched with satisfaction as several people got out. Who is that? Beverly asked, her voice rising with alarm. That would be Catherine Morrison, my attorney, along with her associate and a private investigator I hired last week. The silence that followed was deafening. Travis had gone completely white, and Kevin looked like he was about to be sick. Private investigator? Thomas asked weakly. Oh, yes, I said, turning back to face the room. You see, when I found those forged documents in Travis's office, the ones with my signature copied onto power of attorney forms. I thought it might be wise to understand exactly what I was dealing with. Travis made a choking sound. You went through my office? I found them by accident, actually. But once I saw them, I photographed everything. Every forged signature, every unauthorized credit check, every document you've been preparing to steal my inheritance. The attorneys were gathering their papers with practiced speed, suddenly very interested in leaving. Harold stood up, his face professionally blank. I think there may have been some miscommunication about the nature of this meeting, he said. Oh, I don't think there was any miscommunication at all, I replied. I think this was exactly what it appeared to be, an attempted financial fraud. Kevin found his voice. Now wait just a minute. We were trying to help. By forging my signature? By preparing documents without my knowledge? By setting up this ambush with 3 attorneys to pressure me into signing away my inheritance? The front door chimed, and I heard footsteps in the marble foyer. Catherine Morrison appeared in the doorway of the study, a tall woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and the kind of presence that commanded attention. Behind her were a younger man carrying a briefcase and a woman with a camera. Good afternoon, Catherine said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. I hope we're not interrupting anything important. Beverly made a small, strangled sound. Travis had sunk back into his chair, staring at the table. Not at all, I said. In fact, your timing is perfect. We were just discussing some documents that I think you'll find very interesting. Catherine's associate began unpacking files and a laptop, while the investigator started taking photographs of the room, the documents on the table, and the thoroughly rattled attorneys. Now then, Catherine said, settling into a chair with the confidence of someone who owned whatever room she entered. I believe we have some fraud charges to discuss, don't we, Mr. Frost? Travis finally looked up, and I saw something I'd never seen in his eyes before, genuine fear. Before we begin, Catherine said, opening her briefcase with deliberate precision, I should inform everyone present that this conversation is being recorded, and that we have a court reporter standing by to document any admissions. The 3 hired attorneys were frantically packing their briefcases, clearly wanting to distance themselves from what was about to unfold. Harold was already backing toward the door. We were retained solely for estate planning advice, he said quickly. We had no knowledge of any improper documentation. Interesting, Catherine replied, pulling out a thick folder. Because according to our investigation, Mr. Reed here was paid a substantial retainer 3 weeks ago to prepare asset transfer documents that required personal information about my client that she never provided. Thomas Reed's face went ashen. I was given information by the client's husband. You assumed wrong, Catherine's associate interrupted, looking up from his laptop. We have evidence of 17 separate violations of legal ethics codes, including preparation of documents with forged signatures and conspiracy to commit financial fraud. Kevin tried to regain some control of the situation. This is my house, and I'm asking all of you to leave immediately. Actually, the private investigator said, lowering her camera, we have a court order allowing us to collect evidence from this property. It seems Mr. Frost has been using this address for some interesting financial activities. Beverly made a sound like air escaping from a balloon. What kind of activities? Catherine smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. Well, there's the matter of the shell corporation registered to this address, the one that was created to receive the funds from Mrs. Frost's inheritance. And then there's the loan application your son submitted using my client's assets as collateral, assets he doesn't legally have access to. Travis finally found his voice. This is insane. You can't prove any of this. Can I? Catherine pulled out a stack of photographs. These are images of documents from your home office, Mr. Frost. Documents with my client's forged signature, along with financial projections, showing how you plan to distribute her inheritance among your family members. She spread the photos across Kevin's conference table like playing cards. Bank routing numbers, investment accounts, even a timeline for liquidating your wife's grandmother's property. Very thorough planning, really. The room had gone completely silent except for the sound of Beverly's increasingly rapid breathing. The state of Arizona takes financial fraud very seriously, Catherine continued, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd won a lot of courtroom battles, particularly when it involves exploitation of domestic relationships and forgery of legal documents. She nodded to her associate, who began reading from his laptop. Travis Frost, you're being served with papers for divorce proceedings, criminal fraud charges, and a restraining order prohibiting you from accessing any of your wife's accounts or assets. You can't do this, Travis said, but his voice lacked conviction. Kevin Frost, the associate continued, you're being served with papers regarding the fraudulent business loan application and conspiracy charges. Kevin's face had gone from red to gray. I didn't know the signatures were forged. Your text messages suggest otherwise, the investigator said, consulting her notes. Particularly the one where you discussed getting Danielle to sign off on everything before she figures out what's happening. Beverly collapsed into a chair. This will ruin us. Our reputation. Kevin's business. You should have thought of that before you decided to steal from my client, Catherine said coldly. I watched Travis as the full magnitude of his situation sank in. The confident, controlling man who'd been manipulating me for years looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of his collapsed scheme. Danielle, he said, turning to me with desperate eyes, we can work this out. I never meant for things to go this far. Actually, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded, you meant for them to go exactly this far. The only thing you didn't plan on was getting caught. Catherine stood up, gathering her papers. The divorce will be finalized within 2 weeks. My client will retain her full inheritance, plus the house, your car, and damages for emotional distress. This isn't over, Kevin said weakly. Yes, I replied, looking directly at Travis. It is. In the weeks that followed, the consequences for Travis and his family were swift and devastating. The criminal charges resulted in Travis losing his job at North Peak Engineering when his employer discovered the fraud allegations. Kevin's auto repair business suffered massive reputation damage when news of the conspiracy leaked to local media, forcing him to close 2 of his 5 locations. The State Bar Association opened investigations into the 3 attorneys who had participated in the scheme, with Harold Vance ultimately losing his license to practice law. Beverly's social standing in Scottsdale crumbled as word spread through their exclusive community about the family's attempted theft. Travis was forced to move into a cramped studio apartment in Tempe, struggling to find employment with fraud charges on his record, while Kevin faced financial ruin from both legal fees and the loss of business income. 3 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my new house in Tucson, the one I'd bought with part of my grandmother's inheritance. The morning light streaming through the windows felt different here, warmer, more hopeful. I'd kept my job at Phoenix Children's Hospital but reduced my hours, using some of the inheritance money to pursue a master's degree in pediatric nursing. As I sipped my coffee in the peaceful silence of my own home, I reflected on how completely my life had changed. Travis had thought I would fold under pressure, that I'd be too intimidated or too naive to fight back. Instead, I'd discovered a strength I never knew I possessed, and I'd used every resource at my disposal to protect what was rightfully mine. The revenge hadn't just been about the money. It had been about reclaiming my voice, my independence, and my right to make my own choices,